SQL. Let's talk about it. So this is of course a vintage drum machine sampler. But what's the point of having such kind of a sampler at this point in time? So as you know that the 80s have come back in a big way in terms of reinventing itself with synthwave and vaporwave and also the pure 80s pop. Those drum sounds from the 80s are also sought after. Now, besides the fact that we've included a lot of the popular drum machines from the 80s and various famous patterns, the idea that we wanted to focus on with SQL is also workflow. So what is it about the 80s that made music really popular and catchy and all of that? I think part of it was simplicity and the workflow. You could just get a drum machine and you didn't need a manual. You could just learn how to use it in a second because there was a record button. You could step sequence or play in the pattern that you wanted, and it basically became like a drummer replacement. So initially that was the idea, to practice, but they actually seeped their way into recordings finally. So without further ado, let me show you the workings of SQL. The idea is also to give you a great workflow with all the great sounds. So SQL basically has two pages. That's it. So it has a kit page and a sequencer page. So the kit page, as you can see, has 8 pads or 8 sample slots. Now what you could do is of course drag your own samples straight onto the pads, or you could choose from the browser that we have and then save your own kits. You can also change the pitch, the volume, the release time, the panning, even reverse the sample, all according to your liking and design. You can of course trim the sample start and end points. There is also a low cut and a high cut filter just there to shape the sounds at a basic level. SQL allows short drum samples, so it's not really suitable for very long loops or phrases if that's what you're planning to do. On the kit page, there are two controls right on the top. One is called the vintage knob and the other is the drive knob. So yeah, you guessed it right. The vintage knob basically bit crushes and sample reduces the sound to sound like the old samplers, because some of the old samplers had very low sampling and bit rates. So you could throw your own clean samples, modern samples in there, use that knob and actually crunch them up to sound as if they were sampled or made into ROMs for the earlier drum machines. We also have a drive which allows you to simulate the drive of older samplers. If you use a lot of gain, it would crush and saturate the sound, and that's exactly what drive does. Just on the right of the sequencer button, you see an X. That X basically resets the kit page with all samples cleared and all parameters reset to the default values. A very quick and easy way of just starting from scratch and building your own kit. The settings button allows you to relocate the entire library that is included with SQL. So you could take it and put it on an external drive or anywhere else just to save space on your boot drive. This was a major feature request from all of you, and we've taken care of it. There is a BPM indicator which shows the current tempo of your DAW. So if you change tempo in your DAW, the BPM indicator here on SQL will also change to adapt to the new tempo that you may have chosen. The sequencer on off button right at the bottom left allows you to pause or stop the sequencer entirely and actually program your own MIDI from your DAW. Use the pad selector buttons on top of the pads to select a pad whose parameters you want to change on the right side panel. The right side panel of course has detailed editing parameters, so you can clearly and easily change a sample the way you want to or change the parameters of the selected sample. Another interesting feature of SQL is that you can assign any of those 8 pads to any MIDI note number. So that means that if you have any kind of MIDI controller with pads, or you want to shift the octave or place your specific samples on specific MIDI notes, you can easily do that. This is also very useful when you have external drum triggers and stuff like that. It's very easy to customize SQL to do so. SQL is also multi-out. With your DAW, you of course can separate all the 8 outputs into separate channels and then process them with your favorite plugins. Very easy and a very useful feature. Finally, you have the kit output slider. This is to check the overall volume of the kit. If it's too loud, you can pull it down. If the kit is too soft, of course, you can pull it up, all up to your liking. All right, so let's go on to the sequencer page and see how we can actually program patterns. So the first thing you see is a sequencer grid with the name of the sample per pad that you have chosen or selected. Each of the rows for the 8 samples have a clear, mute, and solo button. These do the functions respectively. The big clear button you see on the top left corner of this page is basically to clear the entire sequence and start from scratch. SQL has 32 steps of programming, and you can see them labeled from 1 to 32 right on top of the first row. The yellow blocks, of course, indicate triggers per sample. So the way you want to program your kick drum, your snare, your hats, or whatever samples you may have, that is indicated by the yellow square. You can, of course, hold your mouse down and drag across to get continuous steps or notes. You can do the same thing to erase those notes. Clicking on the numbers indicated by each of the steps can actually create a loop within this pattern. So say you want to loop 8 bars of a 32-bit pattern, you can easily do so by clicking on the number of the step at which you want to end the loop. Clicking on any of the names of the samples on the left side will actually reveal the 3 lanes of parameters which can also be sequenced within this sequencer. So we have the possibility of sequencing the velocity, the pitch, and of course the note length per sample and per step. You can set the parameters per step by increasing or decreasing the values, or again holding the mouse down and dragging across to create a continuous wave or pattern that you would like to do with the steps. The SQL also lets you set the time signature for your pattern very easily. Just click on the drop down menu and select from the options available. You can save your pattern in up to 5 slots per kit. You can also clear or delete any of the patterns you may not be using. So every pad or sample in SQL, which is 8, can also have a swing value just to create a kind of shuffle or groove, which is essentially awesome in hip hop kits and stuff like that. So you can add a shuffle or swing per lane, or that is per sample in its step sequencing, to add a bit of shuffle or natural movement to the entire sequence. Once you're happy with your pattern and you've saved it, you can easily drag and drop it to your DAW. Just click on the MIDI drop button and drag straight onto your sequencer. And now you can see the region within your sequencer. Don't forget to switch off the internal sequencer of SQL before you play the MIDI clip from your DAW. So that's it. It's a very simple, easy, and intuitive plugin. Very, very quick and simple to use. And you can get great results without going into complex pages and a lot of editing. So I see that as we grow in our DSP development and the features we can add, I see we lose out sometimes the simplicity and the joy of making music. So the idea of SQL is basically to bring back that immediacy, the excitement to quickly build patterns and to quickly get a beat going so you can get your music going. So that's about it. I hope you enjoy SQL, and I'll see you next time.